Hello, welcome back. This little mini lesson is covering the central nervous system spinal cord section. It's not quite as lengthy as the brain, so it should be a nice short and sweet one. There's not as many different regions of the spinal cord as there were to the brain. So let's get started. All right, so as we can see here on the left, this diagram is similar to what you would find in your textbook or your lab manual. What's kind of nice about the spinal cord anatomy is it follows the anatomy of your spine. So when you were learning all your different parts of the vertebra, you are going to be seeing those same characteristics here in the spine, in the spinal cord. So we have a cervical section, thoracic, lumbar, and sacral, so that's really nice. And what we're showing here is in these brackets, these are going to be the nerves. So you have cervical, spinal nerves, thoracic, lumbar, and sacral. Now, these are the nerves that are actually coming out of if you remember, your stacked vertebrae has your intervertebral foramen, those little holes that are produced when you have a stacked spine. So those match up with your vertebra. The spinal cord itself, though, actually ends right around T12L1 section of the vertebrae, your vertebral column. So it's actually a little bit staggered. So your sacral region of the physical spinal cord is right around in here, your lumbar region is right around in here, your thoracic region is right around in here, and your cervical region is right around in here. So your spinal cord physically itself is much shorter than your spinal column. What happens is these nerve roots are long and they come down like this because they are exiting out of those holes through your lumbar vertebrae and your sacrum. So some of the features that we can see on the spinal cord itself, other than the nerves that are branching out, we have what's called the cervical enlargement. As you can see, it kind of is a little bit swollen looking right there. All that means is there's extra nerve bodies, neuron cell bodies located in that region because these neurons go to control your arms, right? We have extra things right there. So we need more neurons to control the muscles and more neurons to receive that sensory information. And then there's a similar type of enlargement down here called the lumbar enlargement. And these help to control and bring sensations into your brain. Okay, and then we have the very tip of the spinal cord ends right here. And then the collection of all of those nerve roots that are branching down here, like I had mentioned before, collectively is called the cauda equina, which means horse's tail. And so in an actual dissection of a human spinal cord, all of those nerve roots, I guess, kind of look like a horse's tail. So that's why it got that name. So those are the structures that we can see on this gross anatomy of the spinal cord. So now if we take a look at the sectional anatomy, we can identify some of these smaller groups of things. So what we see kind of first off when we look at the slice of the spinal cord is this kind of wing-like structure here. And this is what we call the gray matter. Okay, so gray matter is where cell bodies are. So if you remember our general diagram of a multipolar neuron, we have the cell body and the axon terminal, and then we had those Schwann cells, remember? So in the peripheral nervous system, we had all of these Schwann cells that were insulating the neuron and allowing those action potentials to travel quickly. So because they're lipidy and they're fatty in the plasma membrane that's wrapping and wrapping and wrapping, upon gross dissection, they kind of look white. Where the cell bodies here don't have any myelination and they appear to be gray. So what that means is most of your neuron cell bodies are located here in the gray matter, and the axons are located out here in the white matter. Okay, so that's really what gray and white matter is. We had some in the brain, we see some in the spinal cord. So gray matter is cell bodies, white matter are the myelinated axons. So when we take a look and start labeling all of these different gray and white matters, we can see that they're named mainly directionally. So dorsal or posterior, again, since those are interchangeable, you can use whichever term you're comfortable with. So that's going to be these parts of the gray matter. Okay, they're called dorsal or posterior gray horns. And then we have ventral or anterior, which is going to be these parts right here. So there's like an imaginary dotted line through those through that kind of gray matter. On the posterior side, that's going to be bringing in sensory information, comes into the spinal cord via those posterior horns, and then motor commands leave going out the anterior gray horn. So the cell body is located in those anterior gray horns. If I were to try to draw one over here, that's my little cell body, and the axon is going to come out and go out that direction. Where if I'm sensory, I have my dendrites out here coming in on a unipolar neuron for sensory, and then I will come and synapse in neurons on that posterior gray horn. So that's the arrangement of the spinal cord's gray matter. And then your white matter is just a collection of axons traveling up and down the spinal cord. Okay, so that's the inside, if you will, of your spinal cord. So the gray matter divided into anterior's motor, posterior's sensory, gray matter, and white matter. Some other features that we can take a look at are these branches. All these branches are coming off of the spinal cord. Just like directionality continues, we have our ventral roots are going to be coming off the ventral and anterior side. And we have our dorsal roots. They're showing dorsal root. They're just going to show dorsal root ganglia. Or no, just dorsal root, sorry. So that's going to be this path right here. And then this dorsal root ganglion, sensory neurons are those unipolar neurons. So remember, they're going to go like this. Their little unipolar comes in here, and then the rest of their axon goes inside the spinal cord. So the dorsal root ganglion is just a little house for those cell bodies of the unipolar neurons. Okay? So your dorsal root and your ventral root come together to create what's called the spinal nerve. Okay? So the spinal nerve is a collection of both motor and sensory neurons. So motor going out this way, sensory coming in this way. So the collection of those things are your spinal nerve. All right, look at that. Oh, there's also an opening in the middle of the spinal cord called the central canal. This is continuous with the fourth ventricle of the brainstem, and it has cerebrospinal fluid flowing through it and lined by ependymal cells. So all of that kind of supportive cells and CSF flow is continuous down through the spinal cord. And then we can also see the meninges. So we have an extension from the brainstem. We have pia mater, arachnoid mater, and dura mater. We will also have subarachnoid space. So in this little area between pia and dura, you're going to have that circulation of the cerebrospinal fluid outside the surface of the spinal cord as well. All right. I think that's it. So not a lot to go along with the spinal cord, but do make sure you're practicing labeling these diagrams, kind of describing the organization of the gray matter, and making sure you know the gross anatomy, your enlargements, your spinal nerves branching off, and your different meninges. All right, so I'll see you next time. We're going to take a look at the peripheral nervous system. Bye.